So it's almost the start of August on the farm, and everything is growing great right now. We've got a lot of basil, we've got our peppers going, and we also have some few other new things that we're doing. So I thought it would be a good time to just kind of show you all our gardens and give you a tour of kind of how everything's laid out on our farm and how we kind of approach things. So starting off, when I say garden, we're talking about a 20 by 100 foot section of 5 rows. So each row we kind of follow the Elliott Coleman market garden type approach where we're growing in roughly 36-inch rows with 18-inch pathways between them. You can see this on some of the awesome drone images and videos that my dad got the other day. And so we grow in raised beds, and that really gives us a lot of flexibility in how we grow and what we're growing. And it's just a really nice approach for being able to walk in the rows and keep them weed free and really concentrate our, fertilizer and compost and amendments on where we're growing. So this approach has worked out really well for us. And we have 7 garden beds that are in that configuration. So 7 different sections of 5 rows that are 100 feet long each. We keep them standardized just so that when we're putting up our high tunnels or when we're doing plastic on them for weed control or irrigation lines, anything like that, it's all a consistent length. The width isn't as important, that does matter some, but definitely having a consistent length on your garden beds is something that I've come to really appreciate. And Then when we're working with these beds, when we're growing in them, we are essentially rotating through them as well. So if you saw on that overhead, we have a couple beds covered, and then we have a couple beds in cover crop this year, and then we have a couple beds that are actually our production gardens. We do that because basil can get some pretty serious diseases. And so, we're starting to diversify a little bit, but the main thing we're growing out here is basil for our basil pesto. And basil can get a couple diseases. One is downy mildew, and that really comes down to preventing that comes down to your seed selection and getting downy mildew resistant varieties. Crop rotation is also important with that one, but it's not as vital. But the one we're really trying to avoid is called Fusarium wilt, and that can harbor in the soil for up to 5 years, sometimes even longer. So we rotate our basil, and what that means is that when we're done with a garden, we don't use that garden for 2 to 3 years after that. And while it's fallow, we cover crop it. We use different types of cover crops, and I can go more into that in another video. But we cover crop it so that it's adding something back to the soil, it's regenerating that soil. And then we also, on that last year, we tarp it to really control weeds. That's a really important thing because if we don't do that, especially this being old pasture grass, there's a ton of weed seed in the soil that just kind of takes everything over. That has actually been one of my weakest things with these gardens is making sure we've got adequate weed control. It's something I'm still working on, hoping to get a little better this year. But, and you can kind of see it's not perfect, right? Like we have a lot of grass coming up in these pathways. These rows were weeded just recently, but there is a lot of grass that comes up in these basil rows sometimes. So it's not ideal, but it's definitely something I'm trying to get better at. And when we rotate, we're using cover crops like right now we're doing sweet clover, and then we also have pumpkins. So that's something kind of new for us. We're doing a cover crop of pumpkins just to have something that's kind of a little different. Maybe we'll have a pumpkin patch this fall. The plants are looking beautiful. They're already setting pumpkins, and so far, fingers crossed, we haven't had any issues with pests or anything like that. So really hoping that holds out for us and that we have some pumpkins in the fall. And then we're going to after that, we've actually multi-cropped that with our sweet clover. So sweet clover takes 2 years to establish. So this first year is it's just kind of building year, and then the next year, I have never done it before, but apparently it just puts on a ton of growth. And then we use our BCS tractor with the flail mower attachment to flail mow those cover crops in and put that back in the soil. So when we grow our basil, so you can kind of see here we have, this is all basil in this high tunnel, in this shade house we've got here. And when we grow it, we're doing succession planting. So that means every week we're planting seeds, we're starting from seeds, 1,200 basil plants. And when I say 1,200 basil plants, we have a 288 tray that has, it's a 10 by 20 tray with 288 holes in it. And in each hole, we actually seed about 4 to 5 seeds of basil. And so I just pulled one up here so you can kind of see what that looks like. So you can see in this one plant spot, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and this one didn't make it for whatever reason, but 5 things of basil. And what this has allowed us to do is harvest this basil younger and younger. So one thing that's really important to us is to be able to get our plants at an earlier and earlier stage of growth. We find that has better flavor for pesto. It's also less labor because the older the plants get, the more mature the leaves are, and we have to pick those off by hand because we can't use them. They get a little too leathery, they don't have good flavor. So really our goal is to be able to get those plants at a really nice stage of maturity where we can just strip off the main stem and grind all those leaves up in our pesto. So that's our goal. And over time, I've gotten to where I plant these rows tighter and tighter. I remember when I first was kind of reading Elliot Coleman's book, he actually advocated in these raised beds doing 4 rows of basil per each bed. And at the time we just did 2. And I was like, that seems like way too many plants. What is he doing? And, there's a reason people are experts at this stuff, right? And that we can learn from them because over time we went to 3 rows and now we do 4. And that does seem to be really effective in just getting a lot more growth on each row and being able to harvest in an earlier stage. And the plants just being less stemmy overall, having more leaves, that kind of thing. So when we plant these, we're starting those 1,200 plants every week, and then we're planting those. We leave them 2 weeks in the 288 trays, and then we're planting them in a row, and then we're coming and harvesting basically a row at a time. Sometimes that doesn't always work out, but that's how we try and do it. And then I'm keeping records on how long to maturity, how much yield we get off each row, and that kind of thing. Pretty simple, but it's nice to know what kind of harvest we're getting. So that's pretty much it for here. And I'm going to show you our peppers that we're using for our red pepper pesto next. But one other thing I wanted to mention is that these high tunnels we're using, like I said, we rotate our basil. So we're actually, in the off season, moving these high tunnels from garden to garden. It's a big project, it's a big process, but it does work pretty well. One of these high tunnels is from Farmer's Friend. That's when we put our plastic on when we want to start crops early in the spring or go into the fall for season extension. This one I'm under right here is actually called a Shade House kit from Bootstrap Farmer. It was quite a bit cheaper than Farmer's Friend. It's not rated for plastic in terms of season extension, so it's not strong enough for you to put plastic over this as like a tunnel in that way, but for just shade cloth, it works really well. And we actually grow our basil under shade cloth year round when we're growing it because we find that it just leads to much better quality of leaf and avoids UV damage on the top leaves of the plants and just gives us a way better flavor. So that's how we do it, and then in the off season we'll move this to the garden we're going to use next year. We do have an experiment going where we're trying biosolarization for the first time, and that's where we take a organic matter and put it on top of a garden, and then we put a clear layer of plastic over that. We have some old greenhouse plastic we're using for that right now. And then we irrigate under there so it has moisture. And that will actually create a fermentation effect that kills Fusarium wilt and weed seeds and can be a viable way for us to use the same garden multiple years in a row. I'm just starting this, so I have no idea if this will work or not, but it's an interesting experiment and would be a big help to us if we were able to do that. I know another grower at Box Turtle Farms in Missouri, he does that technique and swears by it and has, basically eliminated all his weed pressure because of it. So we'll see how that goes. But now I'm going to take you and show you our peppers, and then we'll talk about some of the other things we got going on. So these are my red peppers. We have 100 feet, so we took one of our rows that I was telling you about and put that all in peppers. So it's about 3 different varieties of sweet Italian peppers, and those we're using for our red pepper pesto calabrese, which is kind of like a traditional pesto, but just made with red peppers instead of basil or any green like that. So a little sweet, little spicy, because we also use some hot Italian chilies, and we're growing that down at the end of this row. That's my first time growing peppers. Really proud of how these have done so far. Started them in about January, potted them up, I think, 3 times, and then planted them in May. And fertilized a little bit with biochar and like a crab lobster shell meal. Uh, but other than that, didn't do too much with them. And also, as you can see here, this is our Florida weave. So you kind of go around these fence posts in an alternating pattern and kind of create this like kind of basket of string that holds the pepper plants upright. It's worked really well, super easy to do. I just put this latest one on, and it probably took maybe 20 minutes to do the 100-foot row, if that. So it's very fast, and it's been really kind of hassle-free. And the peppers seem to like it. So I'm definitely going to do this again. This has been a really popular pesto at our markets, and I think next year I might even do 2 full rows of it, which will be kind of interesting. So really thankful. A couple growers in our area gave me advice on how to do these peppers. There was also a market gardening Facebook group that was really helpful. So yeah, I think what I'm going to show you all next is our permanent beds for thyme and rosemary. All right, so here is our permanent bed for thyme and rosemary. So we're growing this for our pesto modenese. It's a creamy vegan pesto we make that has rosemary and thyme in it, fresh herbs. And I started these seeds also in January, just like the peppers. They've really done well. Although the only problem is that our pesto modenese proved so popular, our herbs haven't been able to keep up. So we've actually worked with other growers in the area to kind of supplement our own thyme and rosemary for that pesto. But I've got 2 varieties of thyme. I did a winter thyme and a summer thyme. And then this is a rosemary seed from Johnny's. Was a little hard to start from seed, but I just did a lot of it. And, you know, that kind of made up for the low rates of germination that rosemary has. And then again, potted it up a couple times and planted it after last frost. I did have to put weed barrier down in this bed and along the sides, which I normally don't do, but for these, since they're permanent beds, there was a lot of issues we were having with grass because I didn't prep these properly, like I was saying. And this is 50 feet of thyme and rosemary. So I'm going to try and overwinter this. And in the other 50 feet, I didn't show you this, but I have Blue Hubbard, which is kind of like a squash that I planted as a trap crop for squash bugs for our pumpkins. Our pumpkins already have some squash bug eggs on them, so I don't think it really worked. But next year I'm going to start even more thyme and rosemary with how popular this pesto has been, and do this bed full of it, and then maybe even the bed next to here, which is really just leftover cover crop from last year. Rosemary is a little hard to overwinter in southern Missouri, but I have some low tunnels that we used to use. And I've heard from another grower that it's possible. So my idea is to put the low tunnels over this, fill the low tunnels with straw, do a single layer of agribon on the inside of that, and agribon's like a light kind of composite fabric that provides frost protection. And then I'm going to do another layer of agribon on the outside. And I hope if I'm able to keep the wind off it, that this beautiful rosemary will make it back again for next year, and we'll be able to get these plants bigger and bigger, and you know, be able to just use our own herbs for the modenese. So that's pretty much it for everything we've got going on in the garden this year. I hope you've enjoyed watching, and thanks for the time. We'll see you around.